Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was the one who signed the waivers, checked every buckle, and counted headlamps out loud like a ritual. 8 guests, 2 guides, 1 cave. If you asked my boss back in White Sulphur Springs what a tour guide is, she'd tell you we're part geologist, part babysitter, part meteorologist, part therapist, plus a little bit radio operator when the mountain decides to remind you who lives here and who's just visiting. I never minded the mix. Down in the Appalachian karst, there's a steady hum to the world that doesn't care what's trending topside. Limestone, water, gravity, time. My job at Oregon Cave, private land, Greenbrier County, West Virginia, was to make sure people could hear that hum and then return to daylight with their knees bruised and their eyes somehow calmer. The plan for that Saturday was the Lower Stream Wild Trip, a longer route that starts in the old saltpeter mining section. Timbered rooms and rusted hopper scars from when people scraped crystals for the war, and then leaves the show cave trail for a real crawl. A subway-shaped tube with scalloped walls, a belly drag through clean sand, a short ladder, and a hands and knees bypass around a sump that only seals off after serious rain. Hannah was my co-guide, a biology grad who could recognize a cave cricket by sound and could tie a munter mule faster than anyone I've ever met. We met the group on the porch of the visitor building at 9:10. Cool air breathing out from the steel gate over the entrance like the cave itself was exhaling. 3 sources of light, I said, leaning on the picnic table where the helmets lined up like white turtles. Primaries mounted already, backups in pockets, and a spare in each guide's pack. Petzl or Phoenix, Zebra Light, Scurion, I don't care what you brought, but I'll glance at batteries. Helmets on whenever we're past the gate. Gloves if you want them. No touching formations. Living rock is like skin, and it grows slower than your house ages. If you want to leave the cave better than we found it, keep your hands on rock that already looks worn. Temperature stays around 54, Hannah added, passing out knee pads to those who forgot. It'll feel nice at first. After 2 hours, you'll be happy you packed the extra fleece. I looked over our 8. Names stuck in my head the way station tags do when you're surveying. Sonia, an ER nurse from Roanoke with patient eyes and a small roll-up first aid kit clipped to her belt. Theo, a lean ultramarathoner who had the bright, taut energy of someone who already wanted to know the harder route. Grant, a master electrician with the shoulders of someone who carries cable for a living, already asking about our headlamp lumens. Nadia, a high school history teacher who listened to every word. Luis, a photographer who kept checking his dry bag like it was a pet. Becca, a seasonal park ranger visiting from the New River Gorge. Riley, a limestone quarry geologist who spoke softly and smiled when the talk turned to speleothems. And Evan, a logistics coordinator from Charleston, quiet but polite, saying he'd always meant to see the real thing. We checked weather. Hannah and I both do it like pilots. No flood watch, Greenbrier River gauge low and steady. Our trip lives in a system with a dozen mouths, but this route stream behaves unless the sky goes biblical. Radios charged. We carry VHF handhelds for surface contact. A rescue habit more than a necessity, and they go dead quick underground. But near entrance chambers you can sometimes tuck yourself into a crack and squeeze a message out. Before we dropped, I called our checkout time to the landowner's office. Return ETA 18 o'clock, party of 10. Gloves on, helmets snug, we slid the gate and stepped into the long throat of rock, our breath pluming white for a second before the cave swallowed it. A cave doesn't care who you are. It notices only weight and heat and friction and sound. Our footfalls ticked on old dust, then softened as the floor turned to red clay and then to stream gravel. The tourist trail lights ended, their warm bulbs like a string of stars fading behind us. Most wild tour days, that darkness feels like a clean slate. People lower their voices and let the cool air take the edge off whatever they brought in. That morning, it felt exactly that way. Right. Familiar. Hushed. Down past the mining rooms. Cut-and-fill scars, hand-hewn support timbers older than any of us. We paused in the junction. A ceiling of blackened soot overhead that told stories of burning fat lambs before the carbide age. I pointed out scallops on the walls, little spoon-shaped hollows that reveal the direction of past water flow. In this branch, they face upstream. The cave remembers the river that cut it, and if you learn its language, you can find your way by the curve of stone. Riley nodded, tracing a gloved finger through the line where spalled rock meets a flowstone. Classic Greenbrier limestone, he murmured, more to the cave than to us. We left the trail and stepped down a damp rubble slope, Hannah leading, placing feet where I'd placed mine 100 times. The air held the faint mineral smell that all caves share. No rot, no decay, just stone and water. We moved through a borehole and then a series of lowering ceilings drove us to kneel, then belly crawl through a tube that was all smooth rock and dust. We call it the subway, and it's good-humored as long as you exhale and commit to the slide. On the other side, everyone sat up grinning, caving's version of a shared joke. Yes, you did that. Yes, you can do the next one too. We ate at Elevence's corner, a dry bank above a clear pool where drip rings ripple a perfect circle forever. Water temperature there was 52. I always tell the group that because facts give people a place to put their nerves. On trips like this, fear shrinks when it has numbers. Evan didn't eat much. He'd been steady if quiet, and he laughed with everyone after the subway. But as we sat, he held his energy bar more than he chewed it. Sonia offered him half her sandwich. He smiled, shook his head, took a sip from his bottle. "You do okay with tight spaces?" I asked him, not because he'd complained, but because I ask everyone. "I'm fine," he said, "just tired, didn't sleep great." "Long week?" Louise asked, friendly. "Always," Evan said, and this time he did take a bite. We packed up, did the regular light check, everyone still had 3, and moved downstream. The stream in this route does a thing near the far end. It presses itself into the rock and forces you into a bypass, a limestone keyhole called exactly that by local cavers, the keyhole. It looks like a joke until you rotate your shoulders right and snake through the capsule-shaped squeeze with a sigh. It's the part people tell their friends about back at the porch. Half an hour past Elevence's, Evan stumbled. I heard his helmet tap a wall and then scrape. When I pivoted, his headlamp beam was on the floor. We gathered quick, kneeling in a ring. "Lights up," I said to the front and back. Sonia was already with him, voice even. "Evan, can you hear me? I'm going to check your pulse." He nodded at first, then his eyes rolled. His hands clenched, and his body went rigid. There's a sound that caves don't make. Air moving fast in someone's throat, and it never fails to lift every hair on my arms. His jaw clenched hard, too much to say the word here. Sonia slid her fingers to the side of his neck. "Clear his area," she said. "Don't hold him down." We cushioned his head with a pack. It lasted maybe 30 seconds and ended like dry lightning ends, quick and strange. He lay still, chest moving fast, eyes open but somewhere else. We stayed in a circle, our knees in gloves and wet grit. The cave listened. "He's breathing," Sonia said, "pulse strong." "Blood sugar?" I asked. Could be dehydration," she said. "Could be nothing and never happen again." It happens sometimes. The human body is complicated, caves are cold, fear drinks calories. People don't say everything on their health forms. We planned for it. Hypoglycemia, panic, cramps that turn mountains into speed bumps. When it's minor, you warm people up and give them something salty. When it's not, you call an NCRC rescue and you dig in for hours. I knelt by Evan's shoulder. Hey, your name is Evan. You're underground at Organ Cave. Can you tell me your last name? He blinked. Mason, he said, and for a heartbeat I smiled. My name is Mason. Then he shook his head like a dog shakes water. Sorry, I know. You're okay, I said. We're going to sit for a bit. Hannah pulled out the small emergency bivvy, a crinkled silver bag that looks like a joke until you see how it blocks heat loss, and we wrapped it around him. She handed me the CO2 O2 meter from her pack. We're not miners, but we carry a lightweight multi-gas unit out of habit in these lower routes. The readouts were boring in the best way. Oxygen steady at 20.9%, CO2 barely above outside, no bad air. I called the surface on VHF for the form of it. Party paused, guest unwell, no rescue requested, but we were well past reliable range. The radio hissed like a seashell. I logged the time. I always log the time. He came back like a diver letting pressure equalize, slow, eyes focusing one click at a time. He swallowed water and a packet of honey from Sonia's kit. His hands still shook. He said he could continue, but then admitted he was dizzy. So we made the choice guides make. Return, no heroics. The cave isn't a place you test stubbornness. We'll go slow, I announced. Hannah and I will short rope him through anything exposed. I looked at Theo. You can help me spot feet in the ladder room and the traverse. Theo nodded, all quiet muscle. If that had been the only strange thing, I'd have written it off as Saturday being Saturday. But 2 bends later, we started hearing it. The kind of sound that on the surface you'd call distant traffic and underground you call water talking. It wasn't the usual drip chorus or the low vent sigh. It was a pulse from beyond the next turn, then a hush, then again. I thought of rain on the surface. Hannah and I exchanged a look. She checked the barometric note on her watch. Pressure had been flat since morning. We waited. The sound didn't build like a flood would. It stayed irregular, like footsteps somewhere big. We moved anyway, no point standing in a cold stream, single file with more frequent turnouts for checks. Evan walked. He walked like someone who wants very much to not be lying down and who still knows the floor might tilt. He drank, he nodded. He didn't talk. By the time we got to the subway going outbound, I had the group breathing again, one at a time into the tube. It's always tighter going home because you know the other side holds air you recognize. I sent Nadia first, then Luis, then Becca, spacing them by 2 body lengths. Hannah stayed with Evan. I crouched at the infeed, guarding knees and helmet catches. Theo perched to the side, waiting his turn, smiling like this was athletic more than mental. That's when Evan's light went out. It wasn't a battery dying. The quick fade to amber a headlamp shows when it bleeds, and it wasn't a bump. It was off, like a switch had been thrown, and then on again before anyone could raise their beam to check him. He was farther from me than he should have been in a blink, his feet finding exactly the one smooth path in the jumbled breakdown. His posture changed. Not wild, not shaking. Economical, like his body remembered another version of efficiency and decided to try it on. "Stop," I said, maybe too sharp. It bounced off the tube and came back to me. He stopped. Or the cave made it look like he stopped. In a tube like that, depth is a liar. "I'm okay," he said, voice thin. "Just needed to move." "Keep it slow," I said. "We slide, we don't sprint." He nodded, like a student who wanted class to be over. We fed the line through. We were almost clear when I turned back to check Hannah and saw her staring not at Evan, but past him, down the gray corridor. She wasn't looking at water or rock. She was listening. "You hear that?" she whispered. Evan heard it too, his head tilted. Not toward our lights, but toward the dark behind them. I felt the cave air. The cave breathes. Cold air out in summer, in during winter. When it surges, you can feel it as a hope in your chest, pointing where to go. This was a different movement. It carried a trace, more temperature than smell, of warmth. "Keep moving," I said. "We'll talk when we regroup on the other side." We popped the last of the group out into the wider passage and stood in a circle, the way humans have always stood when they want to see every face at once. "Flood?" Grant asked. "No," I said, and Riley agreed, explaining that floods growl different. We took inventory by habit. One of Luis's glow sticks had cracked in his bag. The faint, cold green filled the seams of the dry bag like a tricksy ghost. We laughed about it because laughter keeps people breathing. Evan didn't laugh. He had bit his energy bar wrapper without quite opening it and was chewing slow. Not the bar, the wrapper. He blinked when he noticed, spit the plastic into his palm, and made a face like a kid who'd swallowed toothpaste. Sonia offered him water. He drank and didn't look at his hand. The back of his glove showed a faint smudge of something that wasn't mud. Not red. Not anything that would upset a content policy if I named it. Just a darker wet that had dried and then was re-wetted. I filed it the way guides file everything. Noted, unpanicked, marked for later. We took the ladder room carefully. It's not a real ladder in the sense you'd find on a truck. More, a fixed aluminum caver's ladder hung from bolts, 10 feet of vertical with a safe landing below. I gave the speech I give every time. 3 points of contact, feet placed more than pulled. No one climbs under anyone else. I clipped my cow's tails to the cable, felt the rungs flex, the rattle of chain mimicked nervous knees. Everyone crossed. Evan crossed like he'd trained for it and hadn't told me. It wasn't faster, it was smoother. He didn't look at the rungs. He looked at the wall to his right, where his hands found minuscule depressions and dragged him up like gravity had changed direction. Back on the trail stretch, the cave opened enough that our beams died before they reached walls. People talk louder in big rooms. We didn't. The cave quiet held a different weight. And then, exactly where my stomach had told me it would, the sound we'd half heard arrived whole. Footsteps without light. Not stomps, not the brave noise of someone announcing themselves. Feet placed carefully at speed, the cadence of someone who knows their route by heart and wants you not to. "Another group?" Becca whispered. "Should be," I said, "but we're the only permit on this route today." I clicked my radio again, more to soothe myself than to talk. It hissed, gave me a snapshot of static, and then, just for a second, fragments of a voice cut through in a way that radios sometimes do with underground refractions. "County EOC," a male voice said, faint enough to make me doubt it. "Shelter. Stay." Then it was gone. Hannah raised her brow at me. No cell service underground. Even near the entrance, you need to be in a precise geometry to tug a signal. The radio had caught something shallow and new. We kept moving. In the upper gallery, the footprints and dust told the story of earlier tours. Past the breakdown, they faded. In the stream bed, history resets with every freshet. I had the group step on rock, not sand, because the cave is a museum, and we aren't supposed to be curators who carve our names on the floor. When the light found them, they looked like people. That's the worst part, and I will say it without detail. They looked like your neighbor in a helmet he'd borrowed, like a woman who had brought her husband because he loved national parks. I've seen panic underground and I've seen patience. This was neither. They moved like a current had gripped them, swift where the dark was deep, slower when our beams hit them. Their lights were off. When our beams touched them, their eyes contracted like the pupils of deer in a headlamp. Then they turned their faces away and found roots that someone without decades of caving would not find on a first pass. They didn't speak, they breathed, and they moved. "Hello?" I tried, because you try. "Are you okay?" No one answered. You'd think the cave would echo with a no, but caves aren't movie sound stages. Sound dies in soft mud and busy walls. "Let's give them space," Hannah said, voice pitched like a lullaby. We stepped to the side. They slid to our left, then back to our right when someone's light swept them again. It wasn't stumbling. It was a shrugging off of light, as if bright beams were a texture they didn't like to touch. It would make a better story if I said it was sudden, all at once, but it wasn't. It was one hair at a time standing up on the back of my neck as the pattern of their movement repeated, as if the cave itself had trained them to use only what they needed and discard what they didn't. When light hit them, they moderated, looked for shadow, slowed. When they were in our blind angles, they were quick, faster in the dark. The phrase dropped into my mind without permission and made itself at home. Evan swallowed so hard I heard it. He didn't look at the other group. He looked toward the dark space between a boulder and the wall, where airflow sneaks when passages connect. He leaned slightly, as if a magnet pulled him. Sonia noticed and took his elbow lightly. He flinched, not from her touch itself, but from the fact of it coming from the light side, from the circle of our beams. His head turned toward the tunnel where light wasn't. "Evan," I said. He closed his eyes like he'd been caught. "I'm hungry," he said, voice not a whisper and not loud. "We'll get you back to the surface," I said. "We're 25 minutes from the gate." He nodded and didn't move. In the stories people tell later, there's always a moment when someone shouts, when there's a break in the film and all the emotion spills out. Underground, emotion has to pass through rock first. It travels slower. We walked. The other group shadowed us at odd intervals, more interested in the spaces our light didn't fill than in us. When we paused, they paused. When we turned our beams to them, they lowered their faces and waited like night animals do until headlights pass. Hannah tapped my elbow. "If they're following airflow, they know exits as well as we do," she murmured. "They might not be heading for exits," I said, as if that would land soft. We went through the last real obstacle before the tourist trail. The keyhole, an old friend that you treat right. A limestone tube no wider than a backpack laid flat and no taller than a sleeping dog. The kind of squeeze that reads as physics more than courage. I went first to show the way. Your chest compresses. Your breath hisses out against rock, smooth as bone. And then, as if the cave has decided you are slim enough in spirit and body, you pop through to a wedge-shaped room that always smells like nothing. I turned my light back and shone it at angles that make the slot look larger. It's a trick, but a kind one. One by one they came through, swearing softly and then laughing, relieved. A dozen trips and I still want to clap every time. Evan's turn. He rotated his helmet, found the line, slid in, and then stopped. Not trapped, just still. Sonia's hands were on his boots, talking with pressure. "Exhale," she said gently. "Let the rock breathe for you." He exhaled and moved. When his headlamp emerged, it was off, although I'd watched the LED glow hit the rock when he started. He had turned it off in there in the slot. I didn't say anything then. I only noted how quickly he moved once he was in that strip of darkness, how precise his shoulders were. He came out easy, eyes darting not to me but to the half-shadow behind my hip. The radio hissed again. Another fraction of a voice, this time a woman, tight and professional. "Shelter in place, avoid contact, if bitten, do not," and then it was gone. We all looked at the radio like it was a mirror catching somebody else's house. "All right," I said in a voice I hoped sounded boring. "The tourist trail is ahead. We'll pause at the junction and decide if anyone wants to see the old hopper or if everyone wants daylight and stew." "Stew," Nadia said, and several people laughed as if the menu decided survival. The last 1,000 feet of cave is a map I can feel with my knees. I let myself think of the porch smell, wood and sun, and the way the spring water tastes from the blue jug by the check-in logs. I let myself plan the debrief. I let myself imagine calling the landowner and then the county to ask what the radio chatter had been. That's who I was at 9:10. A person who could imagine how the rest of the day goes and plan for it without breaking a sweat. We rounded the last plaster-white bank where locals stick their muddy handprints every year at the Christmas candle tour, and that's when we realized we weren't alone at the gate. Light is a promise on the surface and a tool underground. Here, just inside the steel bars of the entrance gate, it became a wall. Through the horizontal slats, the outside world was bright as a mirror. Not hot, not glaring, just total. Dandelions on the bank shone a saturated green like postcards. Dust motes hung in the gate square of day like confetti. We all inhaled. We always inhale at the gate. Hannah reached for the lock. 3 figures waited in the entrance corridor just beyond the last of the underground fixtures, half in daylight, half out. They weren't part of our group or the shadowers. They faced away from the light, toward us, heads angled down a fraction as if listening to the air moving around our boots. They were still. Not stiff, not theatrical. Still, the way a hiker pauses at a ridge to listen to a creek below. Their helmets were scuffed. One's chin strap hung loose. Their lamps were dark. "Hello," I said in my most ranger voice. They didn't turn their faces to our light. They eased to the side in a synchronous calibration to the smallest shadow. In the moment the day hit their profiles, their shoulders tightened like someone stepping into cold water, then relaxed as they slipped back out of the beam. They weren't guarding the gate the way a person would guard a door. They were avoiding light in the way a person who'd learned a new rule today might avoid something that suddenly hurt. I moved slow, put my hand on the lock like the next thing we were going to do was obvious. Then, because I am the kind of person who builds mental checklists with Velcro on the back, I said the list items I'd rehearsed since we first heard footsteps. Air, okay? Yes. Group intact, yes. Path behind open, yes. Alternate exit. Hours away, rescue gear, limited, radio, uncertain. "Becca," I said softly, "you have your whistle." She nodded, fingers on the orange Fox 40 that cavers and river guides both swear by. "If we need signal codes," she said. "Let's hope we don't," I said. "But if we do, 2 longs and a short means go." Hannah's hand on the lock paused. "They'll move fast when we kill our lights," she whispered, not looking up. "We've both seen it now." I nodded. There are games you learn in caves, harmless things, speed crawls and obstacle courses for boyish days. And then there are rules you learn by listening. This new rule had shown itself twice. When light didn't touch them, they were quick, like water finding a path. When light hit them, they moderated, as if the glare created drag. "Here's what we do," I said, as if this was a drill. "We split beams. I'll keep mine low. Hannah goes high to create a curtain. Everyone else diffused. Point your lights at the floor, not faces. We move as a single unit to the gate. No sudden movements. Sonia, you with Evan. Theo, spot our flanks. Luis, your dry bag is a shield now. Keep it in your hands." "Shield?" he echoed, trying to make it a joke, succeeding only a little. "Against elbows and panic," I said. "Not against anything else. You use the words that calm the body you're trying to get through a hole." I leaned to the lock. My left hand shook in a way I would deny later. The steel was cold. The padlock was the kind of farm lock that whines unless you baby it. I turned it slow. The figures edged to our side, but not at us, toward the plain where shadow pooled heavier. I swung the gate inward, the noise of steel on rock a chalkboard in the hush. The day air pressed against our cheeks like a friendly dog. We stepped out like we'd just left a matinee and couldn't believe it was afternoon already. Ferns nodded under a breeze. The trail to the parking lot had never looked shorter. The first bird song we heard was so thin and normal that someone snorted, then covered their mouth like it was a sin. We didn't run. I wanted to. I put every nerve in my left shoulder into not doing it. We walked, and the three near the gate, tilted their heads to keep the sun off their eyes and let us go. It felt so kind I still think about it when I close my eyes. On the porch by the guest book, the landowner's old hound raised his head from where he'd been sleeping and thumped his tail twice, slow, then put his chin back on his paws. Hannah went to the radio in the office doorway and lifted the mic like she was lifting a piece of glass she couldn't drop. "Greenbrier County EOC, Organ Cave," she said. "We're clear of the lower route with a party of 10. We need to know what's going on." The radio, which in normal hours is a creature of farmers, school buses, and the unhurried clock of rural dispatch, sounded suddenly like a freeway on a snow day. Tight, layered, clipped. "Copy last, repeat location, then shelter in place if safe, avoid," the word fuzzed, "blood or other fluids. If anyone is bitten or scratched, apply pressure, cover with clean cloth, isolate person, EMS availability, limited." "Limited?" I said out loud. The dog snored, impervious to acronyms. "Outbreak," the dispatcher said. That word that in movies turns every door into both exit and trap. "Stay inside, away from windows. If you must move, move during day. Avoid contact. Lights will agitate some but may slow them. Be advised, in dark areas they move faster." She said it like she'd had to say it enough times to make it a line. "Copy," Hannah said, voice smooth. She clicked the mic off, then on again. "We have one guest who had a seizure-like event underground. He's ambulatory. We're going to isolate in the office for now." The dispatcher's voice softened a degree. "Understood. Count heads, lock doors. If you can safely assist travelers, do so from a distance. EMS staging at the fairgrounds, but we are not, repeat not, calling people in unless life-threatening." We gathered. The office smelled like dusty t-shirts and coffee. The guest book sat open to a page of looping names and the kind of cartoon bat doodle people draw when caves get in their blood. Half the group went for their phones and got the spinning wheel of no service. Greenbrier County is generous with views and stingy with bars. Hannah turned the landline on the wall into a friend and got a dial tone that felt like mercy. "Call who you need to call," I said, "but keep it short." People nodded and whispered into the receiver about being safe and being at a cave, as if their loved ones were supposed to picture something simple and picturesque instead of a network of hollows under hills. Evan stood near the window out of the sun's line. He had both hands flat on the drywall like he was reading a book through the paint. Sonia stayed with him, talking small. He blinked like the light was too bright even indoors. "How do you feel?" I asked him. "Hungry," he said. Then, like the words embarrassed him, "It's okay." "Anything hurt?" I asked. "My hand," he said, and held it up. There was a nick on his knuckle where he must have kissed rock in the subway. Not deep, clean. We washed it, covered it with gauze, slid a glove back on. He thanked us like we'd changed a tire for him in a rain. There was a thread of different cadence in the way he said it, like he was reading the phrase off a teleprompter. We settled and we counted. All 10. The way I will always say it. All 10. Hannah closed the door and wedged a wooden chalking block beneath it. A habit from floods, repurposed. And here is where the story is supposed to end, I know. We step out into day, we lock a door, we wait out a storm. But the mountain doesn't care about storyboards. The outbreak that the radio named was in town, at the fairgrounds, in line breakfast places, in the roadside church lot. It was at the edge of the pasture beyond the cedar fence and also, if I am honest, that morning. Standing with us at the cave mouth trying to avoid the way light made eyes narrow. We heard it first as the swing of the gate clinked. Steel contracting in sun is louder when the day's quiet is new. Then the huffing that a group of hikers makes when they crest a hill. Then the stutter of footfalls on gravel that didn't match the speed of breath. Down the path came a family of 5, led by a dad in a camo cap who had the look of someone who has decided he will keep everyone safe and will do it even if he has to arm wrestle the sky. Behind him, a mom carrying a toddler with a towel tossed over her head like a papoose sling. 2 teenagers brought up the rear, each of them simultaneously bored and trembling. "We saw cars," the dad said as soon as he spotted us, raising his hands to show they were empty. "Downtown, folks, moving funny. We cut across the field, the noise from the church." "No one's inside," the mom said, like she could say words back into the building and make them stick. "We're okay," I said, "because you say it. We're in the office. Come in." They hovered at the threshold like it might bite. I turned the shade so the afternoon glare wouldn't cut their eyes in half. The teenagers slid to the corner with the t-shirt rack like merchandise could hide them. The dad paced once, then decided he needed to be useful and found the water jug with the cone cups. He filled 2 and handed them to the kids, then himself didn't drink. We didn't have enough chairs for everyone. We sat on cool floor and leaned into the shelves. The landline took turns like a confessional. The radio muttered in its police cadence. Outside, the hound snored. On the other side of the glass, a shape moved at the shadow line of the porch and then withdrew when the strip of light spilled wider. Not the family. Not a guest. Something that found shade like a doorway and watched like a neighbor. "This is going to sound strange," I said, because it is the only way to begin sentences like that. But if we have to move later, we move while it's bright. And if we have to cross any dark space, we do it with light on what we don't want anyone else to take. "Light?" the dad asked, narrowing his eyes at me as if he thought I might be working a riddle. "They move faster in the dark," Hannah said plainly, "and slower in the light. Not everyone, maybe, but enough to set a rule." He nodded. He looked like a person who had a hobby that uses rules. Maybe bow season, maybe old trucks. "Okay," he said finally, "okay." We cut old cardboard into wrist shields because it made people feel like they'd made something. We reinforced it with duct tape because duct tape is one of those relics that are always true. We brought out the spare helmets. We raided the gear bin. Extra Y lanyards with screwgate carabiners. A coil of 8mm static line I keep for nothing more than the feeling of having rope nearby. I taught the teenagers how to make a figure-8 follow-through in less than 10 minutes because kids learn fast when their bodies understand stakes. Through all that, Evan stood near the back room door, half in the corridor shadow and half out. I wanted to ask him to sit. I didn't. I wanted to tell him a joke. I didn't have one that wouldn't feel like breakage. He looked at me sometimes the way a diver looks at the surface when they've convinced themselves they don't need to go there yet. He didn't fidget. He didn't rattle. He seemed like a body resting exactly where its instinct told it the least light touched. When the toddler fussed, he closed his eyes and then opened them, and for a second his pupils didn't shrink in the light the way ours did. "We should go to the fairgrounds," the dad said eventually, because the radio had said staging and staging sounds like salvation. It's open. They'll have EMS. Staging doesn't always mean intake, Becca said gently. Sometimes it means triage and wait. It's a half-mile, I said. Fields most of the way, fences, a shaded edge of woods that isn't ideal unless we bring lamps like we're decorating for a birthday party. I traced the route in my head. Past the cedar, along the fence, hopped the old stone wall, cut past the big sycamore. I pictured where Shadow would lie at 14:30 on a late spring day, how the hill would throw a cool line across the runoff gully. Or we go back into the cave, Theo said, not as bravado but as math. Close the gate. Darkness scares them? Darkness makes them fast, Hannah said. And the cave gives us no windows and no second door. We stayed. The day slid across the porch boards and made a clock. The radio called towns we knew like old cousins. The words that would not be used in any TV-safe voiceover made themselves known outside. Sirens, a sudden shout, then a kind of open vowel keening that I won't describe because that is not the story I want to tell. What I will tell is that the hound slept through 2 events I would have expected a dog to bark at. I don't know if that means anything. I hold on to it anyway. Around 16:10, the shade on the porch reached the door handle. That's how I know the time without looking. The beam of light dropped from the upper pane to the lower. The strip of darkness that creatures had used all day as a comfort slid up to the wood grain where my hand found it when I opened. Shapes at the yard's edge moved closer, as if someone had pulled tape off a sealed jar. We can't wait for full shade, I said. We go while we can make light the rule. We packed what mattered: water, gauze, one old throw bag filled with glow sticks Luis found in his photography kit. He uses them for marker glints during long exposures, and a handful of LED beacons we normally use to mark turns on wild trips. I took the static line and made a braided handline with knots every yard. If we have to go dark for 10 seconds, I said, this becomes our cave survey line. Left hand, move until you find the next knot. 1 knot, keep going. 2 knots, immediate turn. 3 knots, hazard. If I tug twice, you tug twice back. What if... The teenager with the Fox 40 started to ask. We're not writing the whole manual today, I said, smiling for real because manuals are long for a reason. We just need the day's chapter. We stepped onto the porch together. The light from the west was still full and honest. I clipped a beacon to my belt and gave one to Hannah. We placed 2 on the porch rail like a glittering threshold. The family of 5 moved as a single animal, the dad carrying the toddler now, the teenagers holding the handline the way church kids hold paper streamers on Easter. My group fell in behind, each of them a person whom I can still list by name and breath. Evan stayed between Sonia and me. His light was off. He kept his face turned where the sun made the air warmer, but only just. He favored the shadow of my shoulder like he could walk inside it if he tried hard enough. We crossed the yard. A figure at the oak's far side took 2 steps onto the gravel and then retreated when the glare hit. It lifted a hand not to reach but to shield its eyes, the way people do when they forget sunglasses and step into a beach. We moved. The dog raised his head, thumped his tail, and didn't follow, which I think about now when people talk about instincts. The cedar fence marked the edge of the landowner's property. Beyond it, a field rolled like a green sheet. I counted fence posts while we walked, the way people count prayers or breaths. We made it one fence and then another. Sun touched our cheeks like a hand that wanted us to keep trusting the way it felt. At the edge of the woods, the shade lay like a river across the grass. Shapes stirred there. Not a lot. Enough that my mouth went dry. I unclipped one beacon and tossed it into the shadow like I was playing fetch with a light-loving dog. It made a bright pool. In the moment the beam opened, 2 shapes drifted away, slow, not panicked. They weren't afraid of us. They were uneasy with the glare. The fact of that they were less any kind of cinematic creature than people learning a new rule about light, hurt more than fear. We skirted the shade enough to keep our boots in bright. Halfway to the fairgrounds, Evan's hand tightened on the handline. He didn't grunt or stumble. He held the rope like he'd found the pulse of something he'd wanted to hear all day. He lifted his face toward the dark strip under the sycamore branches and then corrected course because I was in front of him and my shoulder blocked that vector. "I'm sorry," he whispered. So quiet I almost pretended not to hear it. "For what?" I said. "Being slow," he said. And he wasn't slow at all. He was the right speed for the day. We reached the fairgrounds gate. A trooper stood with his palm out like he could stop the illness with a gesture. The parking lot held a dozen vehicles arranged in the kind of precise spacing that tells you someone with training has been in charge. A paramedic with her hair braided tight stood in a square of shadow just inside the tent, her body oriented so she could step into light in half a second. When she saw us, she didn't wave us over. She moved to a place where the sun caught her shoulder and waited for us to read the sign. "We're here," I said, and some part of my breath left me. "Check," the paramedic said, her voice busy with 10 things. "Bites? Scratches? Anyone acting unusual?" Words are rough tools. They bang into each other when you force them. "We're okay," I said, and in that elastic pause all the strangeness of the cave lined up behind my ribs and waited. "Anyone with seizure today?" she asked. Sonia glanced at Evan, then at me, then at the paramedic. "One," she said. "One short event underground. He's alert and oriented. Small hand laceration, covered." "Okay," the paramedic said. And now she looked at Evan the way nurses look at everyone, half kindness, half bloodhound. "We're isolating anyone with neurosymptoms for monitoring. Not because we think you're a danger, because we don't know enough yet, and we want to keep everyone safe." She said it gently. It still felt like a hand on his shoulder. Evan nodded and smiled with only his mouth, the way people do when they've decided to be generous in a way that costs them something. "I understand," he said. His eyes flicked to the tent where shade held like deep water. He looked alongside it, not into it. The trooper handed us masks and wipes and a paper that might as well have been blank for all the new words it tried to make ordinary. We washed our hands like we were turning the day backward. The teenagers drank water like they were filling canteens before a hike. The dad finally took a sip himself and closed his eyes for 1 second like it was the first prayer of his life. The fairgrounds had the right noises. Generators. Voices trying to stay calm, the occasional crackle of a radio. The wrong noises came less often. When they did, they came from the shade where someone stepped too quickly and then was coaxed back with calm, bright light. The sun slid toward the ridge. I looked at the expo building roofline and used it as a sundial the way I did when we were surveying the new crawl bypass last fall. The maths always soothed me. Hour angle, elevation, distance to shadow tip. The numbers said we had 90 minutes before full shade wrapped the parking lot like a blanket. I found Hannah on the far side of the tent, knotting webbing around a steel post the way she knots worry into things that can hold it. She looked tired in the way that makes me love the people I work with. Eyes clear, hand steady, a small smear of mud on the cheekbone that says she's done real work today. "You ever think," she said without preamble, "about how we always tell guests that caves teach you to move slower and look harder? And now, here we are, in a world where fast in the dark is a whole new species of bad idea." "Caves told us the rule," I said. "We just didn't know how much of the world was going to need it." We stood with our faces to the west long enough to make vitamin D. Behind us, paramedics murmured in peacekeeping rhythms. Evan sat on a folding chair at the edge of a rectangle of light like someone doesn't want to stand in a doorway but doesn't want to leave either. Sonia sat 3 feet away, not touching him, not letting him feel watched. He scratched at his glove as if it itched. When he looked up, his eyes found me and then slid off, not because he didn't want to meet mine, but because my face was in sun. "I keep thinking about the gate," I said. "How they didn't run, how they didn't do anything, how they just found the shadow line and waited for us not to be in it." "Maybe that's the hope part," Hannah said. "If light slows them, we can keep lines. We can keep bright. We can be annoying with floodlights and reflective tape and every LED we've got." "Maybe," I said, and believed it in that moment. We stayed until the fairgrounds lights buzzed on and turned the lot into a wash of stadium glow. Floods poured a pretend day across the space where the radio had told us to be. The shapes at the edges skittered the way moths do when you click the porch light on, not toward it, but around it, like their bodies remember a night that isn't supposed to be cut into squares. In that actinic not night, I told the others what we'd do next. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't heroism. It was the same plan cavers make when a storm sits on a ridge and the water rises. We'd set watches. We'd conserve batteries. We'd make a map of this new brightness. And where it failed, we'd write rules with gaffer tape where the eye can see them in a rush. We'd count. We'd ask good questions. We'd keep hands off living rock and minds on each other. We'd move in the day, in a group, with light we can put where we need it. We didn't sleep much that night. The fairgrounds hummed. The radio read numbers. The landline eventually died. The hound, someone had brought him in, snored in a way that made 2 kids laugh quietly into their sleeves. We taped glow sticks to tent poles and learned what color lasts longest. We staged beacons at the tent corners and learned how fast their batteries go at full. We set a handline between the mesquite grill and the back of the bleachers like we were mapping a sport we hadn't known we'd have to play. Around 3 o'clock, I walked the perimeter with a trooper who had the polite habit of saying sir and ma'am when he felt most uncertain. We didn't go farther than the cones. We didn't have to. On the other side of the light, shapes moved like deer choose trails they've always used. Sensible, efficient, indifferent. They weren't hunting us the way stories say everything hunts us when the world ends. They were fellows in a new rule book, learning, moving, improvising. That's what scared me, yes. That's also what saved me. In a way I still haven't decided how to respect. If you can learn a rule, you can be slowed by it. If you can be slowed, we can think. And if we can think, we can live in a way that keeps each other. At dawn, soft and hazy and harmless as a prayer, the lot looked like a construction site after a long night pour. Cones and tape lines, bleary eyes, clipboards, the relief of seeing the color green without the floodlight interpretation. We gathered again. My 8, Hannah, me, the family, the pink-braided paramedic whose name I finally learned, Kayla, the trooper, Brennan. I checked headlamps not because we needed them, but because that's who I am. 3 sources of light. We had more now than when we'd walked in. Hardware store lanterns, a couple of those ridiculous camping strings that look like fireflies in jars, vehicle headlights angled carefully to throw brightness into future edges. The plan for the next 12 hours was modest. Modesty saves as much as courage. We'd go back to the office to fetch the cave's hay phone, an old low-frequency rescue radio the local grotto keeps for when someone draws a bad card underground, and a few more helmets for volunteers. We'd use daylight while it loved us. "Do we tell people to go into caves?" someone asked. The kind of someone who loved stone the way others love lake water in July. "No," I said. "We tell them to use what caves teach. Move in day. Use light where you want movement to slow. Learn the wind. Learn the floor. Don't act like the dark owes you anything." Evan watched the sunrise like someone who's seen a long night and is still deciding what he thinks about mornings. The light hit his face. He didn't flinch. He lifted his hand like he was testing rain. He looked at me and didn't slide his gaze away. He smiled, and it reached his eyes. He ate an entire breakfast bar without chewing the wrapper. Sonia breathed out so quietly you'd only notice it if you'd spent days counting other people's breaths. We never did find the exit that day, in the way I used to mean it. The neat gate, the porch, the jug of cold water with paper cones stacked beside it. We made one. We made a hallway of bright between the cave and the town and the fairgrounds and the quiet places where people could sleep. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.